The Royals grabbed a big game one in St. Louis with game two looming later tonight. I'm going to tell you how important this afternoon was next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, or you can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some producing, hosting, and some co-hosting on the day-to-day. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedon and use code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. I didn't want to wait until tonight to do an episode because I'll be busy a little bit later on, and we're going to have a special crossover episode tomorrow morning going on with Locked On Cardinals. So that'll be a good way to wrap up that series in St. Louis while the Royals have an off day and before they head off to Boston for a 3-game series to close out the first half of the season. So today I wanted to squeeze one in right before game 2. As I'm recording, it is 5:23, so hopefully this gets up in a very timely manner, so you have something to listen to or to watch before the Royals have game 2 against St. Louis. Michael Wacha on the bump against a rookie that is going to be throwing for the Cardinals. But as for this afternoon, I thought it was massive for where this team was at, for what this win means, and what it sets up for later tonight. Starting with Alec Marsh, and we're going to dive into him a little bit more in the second segment of today's episode. Alec Marsh did not look good in the first 3 innings of the game. He did have a clean first, but then got roughed up by a Nolan Arenado home run in the second, and then had a 2-run home run, in the third inning to kind of put this game in a downward trend for Kansas City. And so many times in the first half, more so in June and late May, the Royals would show some type of tenacity in making a comeback. More often than not, it came on the road. At home. On the road, they would never really give themselves a good chance. At home, anything would be possible. But on the road, we had known that the offense had struggled. They weren't very good in Colorado in game 1 and game 2 over the weekend. But in game 3, they ignited for 10 runs. Some of that was because a 4A guy was on the mound. Some of that was because of the altitude in Denver. And some of that was because Colorado's not a good baseball team. St. Louis has been one of the better teams in baseball over the last month and a half. They have really started to pitch well. They have had guys in their lineup start to spark it. And guys like Paul Goldschmidt, who were struggling at the beginning of the year, were starting to get closer and closer to form. Now, Nolan Arenado, another guy that had a bit of a down year going into today. He does get 2 hits, one of them being a home run. But it just felt like after the top of the 4th inning, this was going to be chalked up as a 6-1 loss for the Royals. Like so many games before at Busch Stadium, where the Royals offense just can't do much against whoever they're facing, and their starter will eventually flame out by the 5th or the 6th. But after that 2-run home run in the 3rd inning that Alec Marsh allowed, the Royals controlled that game. They had 6 unanswered runs. They retired, I believe it was 17 of the last 20 hitters. They had one stretch where they had retired, I think, 14 in a row or 15 in a row. I mean, completely silenced St. Louis. Alec Marsh gets the quality start. Again, we're going to talk about him a little bit more in the second segment tonight. But I thought the bullpen, for the most part, Will Smith, Sam Long did their job. James MacArthur, shaky. I got some pushback on Twitter, but I'm just not going to champion a outing in which you put the tying run at the plate when you had a 3-run lead going into it. Yeah, you can say they were good pitches and hitters did something with it. It's still not as sharp as he could have been. But today was huge because we found out this morning Sonny Gray wasn't going to pitch in game 2. If the Royals lost game 1, 6-1, and then had to face Sonny Gray, I don't think I would have felt good at all about the Royals' chances. But now you get that first one out of the way. There's no pressure on you tonight. I said at bare minimum, you gotta split the doubleheader. You got that taken care of. You could lose 14-0. Nobody would feel good about it, but you would leave with a split. And I thought that was the bare minimum they needed to do in St. Louis before going off to play Boston. Now you really start to give yourself an opportunity. If they win tonight, Michael Wacha on the bump, who's pitched fantastically over his last 8 outings, he's going to have the upper hand. The Royals should be the team that you're betting on going into this game because of the way the pitching matchup shakes out. Now, those are betting lines. It doesn't really mean anything once the game actually starts tonight. But they do have the advantageous pitching matchup going into this one. I was impressed, though. I was thoroughly impressed with this lineup, with some clutch at-bats in that 5th inning in which the Royals tied it. Hunter Renfroe continues to tear the cover off the ball. I mean, you literally look at the first half of the season, I can only point out like 3 or 4 bad weeks back in April where Hunter Renfroe was a nuisance to this offense. Once the calendar turned to May, Hunter Renfroe became a valuable piece to this lineup. MJ Melendez had a big hit in this one. And I think that MJ Melendez is a guy in the second half that the Royals are looking to turn the corner. And I think since the beginning of June, MJ Melendez had turned the corner a little bit. We had referenced Garrett Hampson last night as a guy whose job may be on the line if the Royals are to make a move. He had the game-tying 2-run double. That was a huge at-bat in this game and maybe the biggest at-bat in this game. Salvador Perez has the go-ahead home run, and then you get some insurance runs later on in the game with a Vinny Pasquantino sac fly and then a Salvador Perez run-scoring single. They were 4 for 8 with runners in scoring position. And I don't think the Cardinals had anybody. Actually, excuse me, they had one opportunity on the day with a runner in scoring position, and they flew out to end the game. So they were 0 for 1. The Royals pitchers did a great job at keeping guys off base, keeping guys out of scoring position. And this was a Royals win I don't think we had seen since really Cleveland. I thought the night 1 of Cleveland was the last time I remember a game as feel good as this one did. The game on Saturday against Cleveland 2 weeks ago, they blew them out of the water. Then on Sunday, they won 6-2, but they were ahead for the most of the game. This was a comeback. This was your bullpen being able to lock things down. You were great with runners in scoring position. All things considered, you feel great now with 4 games to go. And you're setting yourself up for a very big and important weekend in Boston. Regardless if they win or lose tonight, it's going to be huge in Boston. But you win tonight, and let's say Boston loses to Oakland. They won 12-9 last night. Half a game back going into that series. Now, again, they'll play Oakland one more time on Thursday, whereas the Royals get an off day for travel. So the Red Sox could have a 1-game lead if they lose the series to Oakland, or they could have a 1.5-game lead if they win the final 2. But I do think you just feel a lot better. We had talked about back in April and May the shirts that the Royals had, the vibes being high. Well, the vibes hadn't been really high in quite a while. There had been series in which the Royals had played subpar. They didn't bottom out. They didn't lose 6 in a row, 7 in a row. But you sit here at 50-43, and you're getting closer and closer to the All-Star break where you really can just kick your feet up, relax, celebrate the guys that are going to be in Arlington, which we'll be down for, by the way. But you can have a long week off, and then you come back with an incredibly easy stretch to close out the month of July. Then there are 2 months left in the season in which you're going to be trying to make a strong push. Not trying to put everything into one game, but we all know what the Royals-Cardinals rivalry has resembled over the last 20 years, over the last 30 years for that matter. The Cardinals win a lot of games against the Royals, whether it be at Busch Stadium or it be at Kauffman Stadium. They got the Royals' number. And yes, you can point to the flag that says 1985 World Champs at Kauffman Stadium, but the Cardinals have really resembled what it means to be a consistent and competitive team. And anytime the Royals beat them, it feels good, but it feels even better when these teams have basically been equal this year. They had the same record, basically. I think they were both 6 games over 500 going into game 1 of the doubleheader. But now the Royals have jumped ahead, and they grab win number 50. 50 before the All-Star break. They're 7 games over, and they have a chance tonight to pull off a doubleheader sweep of their in-state rival in the I-70 series against the St. Louis Cardinals. Michael Wacha going to be on the bump for Kansas City. They'll have an off day tomorrow, and then we'll head to the Northeast to take on the Boston Red Sox at Fenway Park. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, look, Alec Marsh is not a stud in this rotation, but I think he's fine as the number 5. I really don't think they need to bump him out of that spot. And I'm going to tell you why next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to a few of the sponsors today, starting with Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially for baseball games, it's time to explore those cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we are talking about your rivals' cities. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your rival's city. Now, I'm going down to Arlington. I'm also going to make a couple more stops along the way this season when traveling to cover this team. So you'll bet that I will be going to Booking.com to find my hotel, to find everything that I need to when getting the perfect stay. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this MLB season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or on the Booking.com app. If you're also thinking about going to any games in the future or concerts or comedy shows, whatever it may be, go to Game Time to buy your tickets. They make it so easy. You've heard me repeat this so many times since taking over as host of the Locked On Royals channel. I buy my tickets for Royals games on Game Time. I was at a concert last week. I bought the tickets on Game Time. When I'm always looking at what to go to next, you guessed it, I go over to Game Time to buy my tickets. They make it easy whether you're going by yourself, you're going with a friend, a family member, multiple people, a party. It does not matter. Game Time is always going to have you covered. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. There was a little bit of a panic that set in, I think, in the first 3 innings of the day's game because Alec Marsh didn't look too good on the mound. And let's be honest, since he had dominated the Yankees, holding them to 1 hit over 7 innings, Alec Marsh had been a well below average starter. There was not any scenario in which you could turn to him every 5th day and feel confident about what he was going to give you. And today, he gives up 3 runs in the first, 2 1/3. And you start to feel like, man, his ERA is getting closer and closer to 5. He's not really striking anybody out anymore, though he was getting a lot of swing and miss in the early parts of this game. He finished, actually, with 8 strikeouts on the afternoon. But the more I got frustrated or just kind of all up in arms about the outing, we saw him bear down. We saw him really return to what we had hoped he would 2, 3, 4 starts ago. I mean, we kind of saw the Yankees version and the way that he pitched against New York. We saw the way that he pitched against Baltimore 2 times. We felt like that was kind of coming back into form over the 4th, 5th, and 6th inning of this one. And Matt Quatrero trusted him at 87, 88 pitches to go back out in the 6th, and he retired the side 1, 2, 3 with 2 strikeouts. But even with the bad start, even with the last couple of bad outings and the panic of, well, we got to get somebody else in there. Here's what I will tell you. There is nobody in the organization that is good enough to be a number 5 right now. And I mean that in place of Alec Marsh. Alec Marsh is fine as the number 5 starter. Daniel Lynch is not a number 5. Jonathan Bowen is not a number 5. Anthony Veneziano is not a number 5. Andrew Hoffman is not a number 5. None of those guys are. There is not a single one you could turn to that would give you better production than Alec Marsh. And Alec Marsh's production is not fantastic. I will double down on that by telling you most 5 starters, even on good teams, aren't dominant, right? You kind of roll the dice with your 5-starter. It's a coin flip. Sometimes they'll give you 6 innings of 3-run ball. Sometimes they'll give up 6 or 7 in 3 2/3. And I know that can be frustrating. Watching Alec Marsh get roughed up by Tampa, watch Alec Marsh get roughed up by Oakland, get roughed up by San Diego. Like, all of those things are rightfully going to be criticized. As we said yesterday, this is the big leagues. It's a business. It's what have you done for me lately? And if you haven't pitched well over your last 6 or 7 starts, people are going to be asking, are you the right guy for the spot? But the more I watch him pitch, the more I just assume the Royals are going to stick with him as the number 5 starter. His numbers are not fantastic. The advanced metrics are not fantastic. But I'm not sure they are willing to go out there and make a trade for another starter to either replace Marsh or to give them flexibility if they wanted to go to a 6th starter or move Marsh to the bullpen. That feels like a plan to be sorted out in the offseason. That doesn't feel like something you work out at the deadline. I still think the focus would need to be all on the bullpen. If you can get the right price for an outfield bat or a leadoff guy, I understand it. I don't see the need to go out there and get a starter because this is who a 5-starter is. A 5-starter is a dice roll. You know, even in 2014 and 2015, the 5-starter could have those moments of pitching really, really well. And really over the course of a season. I remember Danny Duffy kind of hovered back and forth between a number 4 and a number 5, then threw out of the bullpen. So yes, kind of the 5th starter. Chris Young, the same thing. And there were stretches mainly because what did they need to do? Go 5 innings, turn it over to the bullpen. Back in 2013, Jeremy Guthrie was that number 5 starter. And yes, he became much better in 2014, ended up starting Game 7 of the World Series. There are all those things that you factor in. But for the most part, when you look across Major League Baseball, you kind of hope the top 3 guys in your rotation are the workhorses. The number 4s and the number 5s, you roll the dice a little bit. Now, I would say with Michael Walker and Brady Singer being the 3/4 in this rotation, that puts a lot less pressure on Alec Marsh to be perfect. And when you get a start like this from Alec Marsh, you feel great about it. Now, Alec Marsh won't start until next weekend. So he gets the full time off. He can rest. He can end the first half on a high note. That I am just fine with. And I just don't know if there was a starter out there, A, the Royals could afford, and B, that is an obvious fit who could replace Alec Marsh. Yeah, he may crumble. He may crash and burn in the second half. But I feel good about keeping him in that spot, knowing that there's nobody in this organization, nobody in high A, nobody in double A, nobody in triple A that could, at this point in the season, take that 5th spot and run with it. I really don't believe there is. There are guys down in triple A that I believe could be good fits for the bullpen, maybe long relief. But as for a starter that goes every 5th day, I don't see it. I think Alec Marsh is the guy that you roll with. I may be in the minority. I'm sure we'll have some people in the comments that disagree, and feel free to voice your opinion. I look forward to banter and going back and forth, mainly on a Mailbag Friday, if we get, certain questions that could lead to that. But Alec Marsh is a fine number 5. He is a number 5 for a reason. He beat out Jordan Lyles for that spot. He beat out Daniel Lynch, and I think he's better than what both those guys would be giving you at this point in the season. I'm not going to complain too much. I can get frustrated with an outing or 2 or maybe 3 or 4, but he's a 5 starter. And that's where my expectations are going to be with him for the second half of the season. Before we move on to our final segment, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, who should the Royals take on Sunday with the 6th overall pick? I'll tell you who I would like them to take next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. The last sponsor we want to give a shout out to is our title sponsor in Prize Picks. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has also got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. The MLB draft is really coming up on the final days here, and the Royals have a couple different options I think they can go with that 6th overall pick. I believe it's infuriating that the Cleveland Guardians get the number 1 overall pick, but that's the way the draft lottery system works. It, makes you want to rip your hair out, but the reality is it's how the game is played. It is to, de-incentivize tanking, and if you lose 120 games, that doesn't guarantee you get the number 1 overall pick. And part of it I do like, and then there's part of me that hates it because a team like the Royals get basically nothing for a really bad season, and they get to wait 5 spots before they can make their selection. The good news is I believe it's a very deep draft class. I think that whoever the Royals take at 6 is going to be a good player. And about 2 to 3, I'll even go 4 weeks ago, I was set on the Royals taking Hagen Smith out of Arkansas or Chase Burns out of Wake Forest. I had felt pretty confident both of those guys, or at least bare minimum, one of them was going to be available. And I thought the Royals would kind of have their pick of the litter there. Whoever you want, you can't go wrong with. And, with Hagen Smith, he's not going to turn 21 until a few months or so. So he's one of the younger college guys in the draft class. He had incredible strikeout numbers. He could run it up to 99, 100 as a lefty. Great ace out of Arkansas. Chase Burns, he's throwing 99, 100, 101 every single pitch. He's got the intensity. On a playoff team, I think you could fast track him and throw him out of the bullpen, kind of in the way that the Royals did with Brandon Finnegan. So that's another exciting pick. So I was on that train for about the last month. And then in the last couple days or so, I think I've shifted my focus because of the mock drafts I've seen, and also just diving a little bit more into each prospect. I think they should take Nick Kurtz with the 6th overall pick out of Wake Forest. I think Kurtz is a guy that is a high ceiling player, but also a very safe pick. And I mean a safe pick in a good way. I don't think you are going to have a bust in Kurtz. I think that he is one of those guys that is going to fast track. I think he's got a bat that profiles to be really good at the big league level. I think he's got power to all sides of the field. I think he's a great defender at first base. Yes, he missed part of the first little bit of the season with an injury, but I'm not worried about that now. I think he's got great size to be a first baseman. I think he's athletic enough where you could move him around a little bit. He's not a quick guy, but he's 6'5", 250. I mean, he's a huge, towering figure. And maybe in the future, he's your first baseman in the future, and you could move Vinny Pasquantino to DH, because I think he could move that quickly through the system. And there are other options out there. They could go with Connor Griffin, another big prep bat. They could go with Rayner, another kid that has a very high ceiling. If the Royals wanted to long play it, really go for the high upside, yeah, a prep bat could be great, because then you're thinking about, putting together a lineup in 3 to 4, maybe 5 years, where Bobby Witt Jr. is still at short, and you got Blake Mitchell behind the plate, and Carter Jensen's out there, and then you could have a Connor Griffin, or you could have a Rayner out there that is your 21, 22-year-old stud. That's the high ceiling we're talking about. But if you're also wanting to capitalize in the next year or two, I think Kurtz is a fine pick. I think Hagen Smith is a fine pick. I think Chase Burns is a fine pick. I believe that the top 5 are going to be Bazana out of Oregon State. I think he's going to go to Cleveland. I think Charlie Condon goes to, I think, to Cincinnati. Then to Colorado at 3, I could see Jack Caglione going there. I could also see a bit of a reach with Braden Montgomery. I could see Oakland kind of doing the same thing there, Braden Montgomery. Then you get to 5 with the White Sox. I could see a Chase Burns or a Hagen Smith going there. But at that point, you kind of know that Kurtz is going to be there. I don't see Kurtz going top 5. So that's why I've kind of settled in on him being that number 1 choice. I think that you could go through this draft class. You could obviously see, if somebody falls in Baseball America's mock draft, Jack Caglione is not going in the top 6. And if Jack Caglione fell to 6 with the Royals, I don't think you pass that up. I think he's got a higher ceiling, maybe more of a bust-like ability than Nick Kurtz. But I don't see really Caglione falling outside even the top 3. I think that Jack Caglione is going to go to Colorado or is going to go to Cincinnati. I could see one of those teams really making a play. But with Kurtz, man, I see a hitter that the Royals desperately need a year or 2 down the road. A guy that led the Division I in walks. He had 1 home run that I watched against North Carolina that hit off the scoreboard in left center field, and he's a lefty. So he's got that type of power to the opposite field. And I think he's got great defense at first base. He's not one of those guys that you just have to put there because he's a big ogre and he can't move. He's got a big bat. I think he's a athletic build. No, I'm not overly impressed with the arm or the speed. And yes, you could worry about the injury concerns, but MLB.com did a profile breakdown on all the guys, of course, in the top 50, the top 100. And they said if the defense continues to come along and there's no injury concerns, he could be a Jim Thome with defensive value. And I think Royals fans know all and well about Jim Thome and the damage he did to the Royals organization as a member of Cleveland, as a member of Minnesota, and even as a member of the White Sox. I mean, he just bounced around the Central and tortured the Royals for years. So you could look at the ceiling of that and go with it, with the prep bat. I also would not be disappointed if they wanted to go the college pitcher route again because of how good Hagen Smith and Chase Burns are. And I think with a guy like Burns, who throws 99, 100, 101, and you see what Paul Skeens is doing this year. Now, Skeens' numbers, of course, better than Burns' in college, and he was more of a high-profile name than Chase Burns. I would not be disappointed if that was their outlook of, hey, look what Paul Skeens was doing with that electric stuff. I believe we can do the same with Chase Burns. I'm not going to fight it. I'm also not going to fight it if they go with the prep guy. Connor Griffin, Rayner, those 5 to me feel like who it's going to be. I'd be shocked if they went outside that top 5. Braden Montgomery's another guy out of A&M that could be a really athletic fit for the Royals. So you want to throw in maybe a sleeper as a 6th there. But Nick Kurtz is a guy that I just think is going to be the fast-track guy to the big leagues, is going to be the guy that can get on base at a high clip. He's going to have power to all fields. He's going to be tough to pitch to. I think he'll be able to tear it up in high A, double A, and get to the big leagues in a year and a half or 2. And I think he's young enough where, you don't have this seasoned 23-year-old coming out of college where you're taking in the top 10. I think there is tremendous upside there. And I'll be curious if the Royals are thinking the same way I am with Kurtz. So maybe it's him, maybe it's Smith, maybe it's Burns, or it's going to be Griffin or Rayner. Kind of feels like that's what the Royals are going to be looking at, considering who's going to fall off the board 1 through 5. But very excited for the upcoming MLB draft, especially now that the Royals are in a playoff hunt, and you can be excited about building for the future a little bit as well. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to have our crossover episode with Locked On Cardinals, and then on Friday, our Mailbag Friday to close out the week. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.